So here we go. All right. So what's fun with this topic of habits, right? And again, because I work in a rehab, alcohol and drug alcohol and drug rehabilitation center, I do groups there. It's all about habits and how do they form. And we could do a whole talk on the difference between just a habit or a bad habit and an addiction. Now we know in the neurology, it's two different things. You can have a bad habit and it doesn't have to be an addiction. You can have a full-blown addiction, and it's way beyond a bad habit, but that's to do with your neurology. But what we're going to do today is talk about habits and give some overview of it. And there was a great book called Tiny Habits. It was probably about 10 years old now, maybe. I think his name was Dan Higgs that wrote it. And it was a good book. And he talked about how habits form. He was a journalist for the New York Times. So it's an easy book to read or listen to because it's well written. But he talked about how habits form and the best way to change habits. Why are habits so hard to form? Why are they hard to break? I know I was teaching a class at this center, and we were talking about habits, and people bring up I read or heard, or the research says it only takes 21 days to make or break a habit. And I'm like, bullshit, right? You could, just because you do something repeatedly doesn't necessarily make it a long-term habit. It can become second nature, but then, the difference between a habit is it's all unconscious, and once it starts, you can't stop it. And it becomes self-generating. So you keep doing it. And I use the example of someone I know, and they went in the Marine Corps, right? And they came back from basics a different person, which is true for any branch. If we have other people there like Billy and that, it's like people go to basics, it changes you, right? But you do some certain things, and this guy came back and he was in the Marines, and he was as they would say, which Billy was on, a squared away Marine, right? Squared away. I mean, he looked like a Marine, he carried himself like a Marine, his uniform was always spotless, even his work uniform. He was a diesel mechanic. That was a skill he picked up in the military, and so he looked great, right? And I mean, real trim and fit. Well, the Marine Corps, I will give them this, except for some certain units in the Army and the Navy, the Marine Corps across the board does more physical training than anyone. The PT 5 days a week, they're running everywhere. My daughter tells the story of being at a training where you had Army Navy joint trainings now. And she goes, they're going from the chow hall to the classrooms, and the Army's marching in formation, right? The Marine Corps is running, and she goes, the Navy and the Air Force are having a donut and a cup of coffee as they stroll from the mess hall to different mindset. So this guy worked out. Here's my pitch for why just doing it a long time doesn't necessarily make it an ingrained habit. So for I think he was active duty 4 years. So whatever that would be, 4 or 5 days a week, unless you're on leave, they're exercising, right? Billy's on that. I can see his picture. Marines exercise all the time. Officer ranks too. I've never seen a fat Marine officer. I've seen thick ones, but I've never seen fat ones. Excuse me, that's politically incorrect. Forgive me, Jesus. I didn't mean to say that in this day and age. But anyway, so this guy gets out of the Corps, and again, he's squared away, he's in shape, doing that. Then see him a couple years later, it's like, what happened to you, right? He's got the big beer gut. He's got wearing he worked for Caterpillar. He had a Caterpillar shirt on, had a coffee stain on it, right? And he didn't look like, a squared away Marine. And I'm like, interesting. And start talking to him. And he said, well, the day he got out of the Corps was the last day he really exercised. Right? And also too, part of about a habit, if you want to keep a habit, and then I'll put up the what we're going to work on. But if you want to keep a habit, the best way is to hang around with people that do that habitually. If it's exercise, if it's eat healthy, or things like that. So he gets out of the core that I forget what unit he is, but it's a part of the Marine Expeditionary Force. So those guys are usually pretty squared away. And and he goes to work in a Caterpillar, which is good company. But I mean, it's like nobody's exercising, nobody's eating healthy. It's like, so even though he worked out, whatever that would be, 5 days a week for 4 years minus leave time, 1,500 times, something like that, right? And then he gets out and never does it again. I mean, he knows how to do it. It's ingrained. If he started doing it, maybe. But so why is that, thing? And we get other people that start doing something and it becomes habitual, right? So let's get started. Hold on one second. There it is. Share the screen. Oh, here it is. All right, cool. Can you see my screen? It says William Horton Small Habit System. So what you want to do is look at like habits you want to change, either add or subtract. It's pretty much the same, it's pretty much the same process. But as in that book, Tiny Habits, what they talked about is, he called it the 3 C's. And I use a version of that, but if you want to get a goal, first it has to be clear, right? As we all know, as hypnotists, NLPers, and coaches, general ideas of what you want will result in very little, right? If you want to lose weight, again, how much weight? What do you want to look like? It's got to be very clear, right? And with the clear, what is the goal? You need it to be very exact, either the thing you want to add or the thing you want to take away. And this is especially more effective for adding goals, right? And with that, it comes into concise. Well, you need a concise, why do you want this habit? And that person I was kind of making fun of about the being in shape, that got out of shape, he lost his why. His why to stay in shape was that's what everybody in his unit. And there was the group standard, there was group pressure, it's the rapport skill of the group. And once that went away, when the why went away, the behavior went away. Another example is you see a guy that like plays pro sports, especially like football, but you see it in the other sports, baseball, basketball, they're in hockey, they're in great shape, and then they retire, and you see them a couple years later, and you're like, what happened to you? You went from, and then again, same kind of thing. I had a client one time, he was a big guy, he's a lawyer, and he was in my office to lose weight back when I ran Suncoast Hypnosis in beautiful Fort Myers, Florida. And he probably weighed 400 pounds. He's probably about 6'3", about 400 pounds, right? And so we started talking, and it was part of a weight loss program. And we get to talking about exercise, and he goes, because I was giving my typical spiel about exercise, and then I'm going to do a technique. And he goes, Doc, I can tell you the exact last day I exercised. I said, well, that's odd, because he's probably in his mid-30s, right? And he goes, he played football for the University of Florida, right? Then I noticed he had the SEC championship ring on and all that. So it's like, yeah. And he goes, so, we worked out hard. We, back in the Steve Spurrier days. And he goes, we work out hard. We're doing this. And he goes, how did he word it? He wasn't a starter. He knew he was never going to be a starter. He wasn't going to go to the NFL, right? But he played. So he was on the team. And so one thing interesting that he said is, he goes, I realized like the first year that I wasn't going to ever go to the NFL. So I finished college and right at 3 years. So his last year of scholarship, he went to law school. they let him go to law school. So he pretty much started his law school. And so anyway, and he goes, the day of, I think he said the Orange Bowl, the day before the Orange Bowl, or a couple days before the Orange Bowl, when they were practicing for that and everybody's working out, he goes, I knew that after that game, and here's how he worded it, I would never have to work out again because he was never going to play ball.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So he lost his why. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, of
Right.
course.
It's like, you know, he had to stay in shape or the coach would cut him. He'd lose the scholarship. The Marine would, you know, if he didn't meet the standards, the gunny sergeants aren't very happy. So what is your why to especially to add a goal? What's your why? You know, if you want to get in shape, why do you want to get in shape? If you want to lose weight, why do you want to lose weight? Right. So it has to be a clear goal, very concise, right? And then when you start this process, you got to be consistently working toward the goal, right? And then if there's problems, you just have to maintain the state of curiosity. And if you're curious, like you say, oh, I want to lose weight. I just did this with somebody at the center who said they want to stop smoking. And I said, well, I'm curious, why do you want to stop smoking? And vaping, God, that's such a big deal at this joint, right? And I'm like, I'm curious, why? You know, and they gave their reasons. I'm like, that's not a very good reason. You know, I want to be healthy. What do you mean by healthy? Right. And so we got down to the why was he was in his mid to late 30s and been in and out of rehab. So, you know, his health was probably somewhat compromised. And he goes, well, the other day he had to run up the flight of stairs to go to the therapist's office. And he goes, I was winded. And I'm like, now there's a why, because you're not far. Of course, I had to paint a bleak picture. It's what I do. I go, you're not far away from having an oxygen hose and carrying a tank up the stairs. Yeah. And he, you know, and I'm curious to any other reasons. He goes, you know, he has kids that were teenagers, and he goes, probably one day I want to be a grandfather. I go, so you don't want to be the grandfather sitting in the wheelchair on oxygen, right? And, you know, at 50, maybe, right? And he's just like, I'm pretty brutal. That's what I did. That's what I'm paid to do, right? So I got I helped him find a clear and concise why, right? And be curious about why. What, you know, is the payoff good? And the common mistakes people make, then we'll just do the technique, is people start too big. You know, they want to lose weight, and all they're thinking about is, you know, let's say they weigh 180 pounds and they want to weigh 140 pounds, 135 pounds. That's a big jump, right? And so you need to be able to increment it, you know. And I always tell this story because it was fresh in my mind from the Guild. I was at the Guild one year, and we were talking about stuff and exercise. It was part of, you know, I do a technique to help people want to exercise. And again, you know, a lot of the hypnotists, NLPers, coaches, psychologists, you know, they'll talk a lot about mind, body, spirit. And then they'll do a lot for their mind and their spirit, but they don't do much for their body. But enough of my being mean. We were talking about it. I said, well, you know, like something about exercise. I said, you know, even if you do 10, 15, 20 minutes, it's a good start. Let's do it. And some guy he goes, well, we all know if you can't work out an hour and 15 minutes, it's not working out. It's not worth it. I went, oh. And thank God I didn't make the next statement. This little old lady in the class did, right? Little old, she's probably my age now. And she goes, well, I can tell you never have an hour and a half. Because you could tell the guy wasn't in shape. And he went, that's mean. And I'm like, well, it's actually kind of truthful. You know, I mean, if you set too big a goal, right? And that part of that goes into comparison. If you're starting an exercise routine or healthy eating, don't compare yourself to someone that's been doing it a lot. You know, my dear late friend Jerry Kine said it once at a conference because he's up doing something. Somebody goes, I just want to do what you do. He goes, well, get back to me in 30 years. Right? Because he's been doing it for about 40 years or something at the time, right? And so you're comparing yourself to an expert or somebody who does it all the time. And the big thing we see that I would caveat now is the comparison of influencers. You know, and I watched someone do a whole rant on, you know, please, 20-something influencers, don't tell me how to stay in shape till you've had 3 kids, 2 marriages, and a failed career. Then I'll listen to you. But I mean, it's that plus 2. We all know social media, and you know, some of you've seen me rant on people about, you know, they'll only put a picture up with the, what's it called, the filters. You know, someone I got close to, I said, honey, you haven't looked like that in 20 years. You probably should either you know, take off the filter. You know, so anyway, so you start too big, or you're comparing yourself to basically an inachievable goal. And then also you don't have a strong enough why, right? It's also the reason as Dan, I think his name is Higgs, if I'll have to get back on that one, but he always wondered why like only 7 to 10%, if that, follow through at all on a New Year's resolution. There's no why. So it sounds good. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to eat healthy. You know, every January for like 15 years, I said I was going to quit drinking. Right? When I was young, when I got out of the Army, it was active and stuff. And that would probably last to about January 4th. You know? You know? And there's a reason I became an alcohol and drug counselor, right? So anyway, that's what we want to do. So what you want to do is, if you want to add a habit, the easiest way to do it, and the research would say, is add it to a habit, or, you know, tail end it into, link it, that's the word I'm trying to think of, link it to a habit you already do, right? So like, you know, a habit I want to add, you know, is drink more water. I don't drink enough, drink too much coffee, not enough water, right? Excuse me. So that's good, right? Again, clear and concise. How much water? Right? If I try to write down, oh, I want to drink, you know, 48 ounces of water a day. That's a big goal, right? And I occasionally want to not be in the bathroom. So maybe I have to like figure out how I'm going to work this, right? And so what's a manageable goal, right? And like 4 to 6 ounces to start, first thing, just, you know, chug some water, right? So that's a habit. It's manageable, it's easy, right? And my why, part of my why would be is I know when I'm properly hydrated with water, I don't want to snack, right? Because I don't have willpower a lot when it comes to like certain things, right? If it, you know, so I do know that, right? So, okay, the habit I want to add is drink like, you know, 4 to 6 ounces, maybe 8 ounces of water, preferably first thing in the morning. Because I also noticed that if I drink water before I start the coffee, I drink less coffee, right?
Good for you.
It's just kind of interesting. I still drink coffee, but not, you know, not as much. So what's a habit I already have? Well, in the morning is, yeah, I get up, I walk down the hallway, and I pour myself a cup of coffee, right? Because my, you know, I got that, my coffee pot makes it before I get up, right? Which is the hardest thing to me about going to a conference, is the coffee machines in the room don't have a timer. It means I have to push the button and wait. I'm not a patient man. So anyway, before I drink the coffee, so the habit I already had would be drinking the coffee. That's my habit I do, and I've been doing that for since I quit drinking alcohol. I didn't drink coffee till I sobered up. So anyway, as I'm there pouring my coffee, you know, and I made it so it would be easy to follow through, I have a little, like a water bottle about half full. And so before I could drink the coffee, I have to chug the water bottle. right? And so that's so the habit is before I drink the coffee, which is the old habit that's just ingrained in me, I will drink the 6 ounces of water. And then you give yourself some kind of mental or reward. And the one I always use is just like, yeah, each day is a moving toward my goal, right? And then the last thing with a small habit is giving yourself a reality check. Is if I forget, I will, do it later. This is how I use the habit of when I'd start my morning readings. I wasn't big on getting up and reading some recovery stuff, some motivational stuff, thing from Buddhist teachings. It's just little like meditation stuff, and I read that, right? So when I started adding that was as I drink my coffee, I will read this stuff, right? And not just start texting or doom scrolling or anything like that, right? And if I forget, I'll make sure I do it before later in the day, right? So in the case of the water, if I forget something happened, I pour the coffee, I'm not paying attention, I don't drink the water, especially if I didn't set it the night before. I'll drink it in the next few minutes, right? So anyway, that's kind of the system. Is first you have to have a clear and concise goal with a strong why. Then you have to do this thing consistently. It may only take a few repetitions to make it second nature. It may take quite a few, right? But it has to be consistent on a regular basis to go into your neurology, and then once it gets in there, it's that. And then always be curious about what your why is. And if you're going to reverse it, I'll do a talk on that later. So if there's a habit you want to give up, you got to get curious about why you have that habit. So if I was going to work on my doom scrolling, which I'm starting to, it's like, why do I do this? What am I running from? What am I trying to avoid? Right? So that's kind of the overview. And I used to do this in my clinic and get people to, we'd walk through it, like, so tell me something you want to do. And in my case, it was Suncoast Hypnosis was primarily weight loss, some smoking and addictions, and a little bit of sports. But I do this with smokers, habit they want to add is, or take away is smoking, right? Smoking. The habit they already have is they take a break, right? Like at work. And their why is they were starting to get, like that guy I talked to, short of breath. So, before I take my break, the suggestion I gave him was take a deep breath and a drink of water. Old classic hypnosis script. A deep breath and a drink of water washes away all thoughts and desires for a cigarette. So, and then just, his reward, it was a guy in my office, the reward would be every time I delay smoking, I think he was going to put a $1 aside, right? Because he was smoking away almost 2 packs a day back then, and because his financial reward was, back then I think it was $5 a pack, right? So 2 packs a day, that's $10 a day. That adds up. So anyway, so you can do that, and if he forgets and he smokes a cigarette, he'll just forgive himself. Don't spend time about where you got stuck. Just get back on the horse and keep going. All right, so that's like the quick overview. I will, if you didn't get the email which had this attachment, let me know, direct message me, and I'll send the little handout, and then or if you have questions. So And there's no big upsell on this. I'm not doing a class. It's just something I find fascinating, right? Trying to add habits, make classes, make changes. But I will say what I'm working on, because a lot of people ask, is I'm going to redo the basic NLP. Then after I do the basic, and I'll be virtual. So I will ask people, if you like this stuff, to just, once I announce it, right? And the guild says they're going to help. Once I announce it, pass the word, right? And if you refer people, I'm sure we could work out a deal. Such a deal I got for you. It's the new America, So anyway, but it's going to be the new basic, and it's all going to be virtual. I'm working out the details now. Of course, recorded if you can't show up. The reason I was going to do it live, and the reason I think I want to do it virtual, A, it's easier to get people, and B, how many people are going to be doing a majority of their interactions online. So sitting in a classroom, the skill set's different than working online, right? And I've been doing online therapy, if you want to call it therapy or coaching, since I think I started in 2012. I used to have to use GoToMeeting. That's how long back I go. So that's first the basic, then I'll do the master, then I'll do the trainer, right? So look for information on that. And again, if you're watching this video later, make sure you click like and subscribe if you see wherever you see it. And just keep in touch if you have any questions. But I'm shooting for probably first part of October to do like a few hours on the weekend, like 6 hours in a row on the weekend, and then a couple hours during the week for practice. And of course, with online, you'll be you'll be getting the hands-on practice in the breakout rooms where you can begin to work. In case you don't do a lot of virtual coaching, you'll get practice. So cool. So if you have any questions, just reach out.